Welcome back to the clinic. Today we have a Ranger crew in for a no start issue. By the intro you can already tell what I found. Camshafts are timed to top dead center. This piston should be all the way down at the bottom, and it is, but the timing mark down here is over. The timing mark on the flywheel is way right there, which then in turn makes the camshafts out of time. This is the accessory drive. In the back there, the AC compressor. These are the bolts I have to remove, along with two underneath that are not fun to get to. After I get those out, the old mag cover, there's no magneto behind it, but the mag cover comes off. Flywheel comes off, and this is what I found. A broken piece in my hand splines into the starter drive and that reluctor wheel I showed you in the beginning where the timing mark was. So the starter cranks off the splines, and then I guess on the newer Ranger North Stars, it's a fairly common issue that if they have a little misfire on startup, the crankshaft kind of hiccups and the starter keeps going, and then in turn so do those splines, and the end of the crankshaft breaks off. Now I'm going to get this whole thing torn down. The box comes off, obviously, so the engine can come up and out. I'm heating up some exhaust fasteners, then cooling them off with penetrating oil. I've had good luck with that for stuck bolts. Here I'm taking all the harness loose, cutting all the zip ties, holding it in place. That goes across the top of the intake manifold. And the intake manifold's got to come off, so. Now on these newer body style Rangers, the back of the clutch cover is actually part of the engine mount. It's made of aluminum now. The older ones are all plastic. But there's 3 bigger bolts on the engine that hold that there. And then there's 4 that go through the gearbox. Pretty big size bolts. So it can kind of be fun getting them out of there because it's part of the engine mount. The engine and the gearbox kind of bind up sometimes. Going in is especially difficult. Now I'm taking the exhaust bolts loose off the manifold. Couple oil cooler coolant lines. Starter bolts. Front engine mounts, there's 4 bolts up there. I bolted on a flange I made to where the exhaust manifold bolts, so I can use this chain hoist to pick the engine out. And we'll carry it over to the bench and get to tearing it down. So I had to remove both the camshafts to get the chain off, but then I like to bolt the camshafts back in so the shim buckets don't fall out. We'll get this oil pan off and start taking oil pump bolts out. I grabbed the torch on the last bolt because the second bolt broke off. They have thread locker on the bolts, and I thought I was okay, but I wasn't. We're gonna mask off this area and weld a nut to the end of that bolt. We'll get the torch out and heat up the threads and try and loosen up that thread locker before we try and take the bolt out. We'll loosen up all the main bearing bolts. There are a bunch of smaller bolts around the perimeter that also hold the cases together. Both on the top and the bottom, so you gotta make sure you get them all. Oil filter and oil cooler adapters come off. Water pump is removed. Gasket cleaning commences. Like I said before, there's a lot of smaller bolts that hold these cases together, so I had started prying a little bit and nothing wanted to move, so I had to look for another bolt that I had missed. Now we'll mark the connecting rods and get the caps off. So we can then remove the broken crankshaft. Now Polaris has letter codes on both their number and letter codes on both their crankshaft and their cases. So you need to look at those numbers before you can order bearing sizes. And then the bearing sizes need to go in their corresponding location. The connecting rods also have codes on them for their corresponding bearing sizes as well. Now we'll clean up this mating surface and get it ready for some gasket maker. My preferred is Honda Bond. I'll torque them and then put a final angle on them. Torque to yield bolt. And then we'll go around with all the smaller bolts and torque them down before this Honda Bond dries. We'll hook the oil pump back up to its chain and install that. put some more Honda Bond on this oil pan and get it installed. Reinstall the oil filter adapter and the oil cooler. Here I'm taking the reluctor wheel off of the starter drive. The reluctor wheel is what the crankshaft position sensor reads the engine speed and position. That's where that timing mark was that I showed you in the beginning of the video. That's on there. We're going to get the number 1 cylinder up to top dead center and time the camshafts with the crankshaft. Once we get that all timed, we'll put the cam chain tensioner in and the remaining chain guide on top of it. Let's get this motor set back in these front engine mounts. It's kind of a slot you have to fit it into. So this part was a little fun, getting it lined up again. Now we're going to get this starter drive installed on this side. And get ready for that cover to go back on that holds the alternator and AC compressor. This is the cover that houses the AC compressor and alternator. We're gonna get a new crankshaft seal installed before that cover gets installed. We'll get this right side cover put on, torqued down. There is on the bottom front of it, there's another engine mount that kind of holds the cover. Otherwise it just holds itself. We'll get the front engine mounts put in, and then that cover mount on the right hand side gets put together before the AC compressor gets put on. Looks like we're getting the alternator torqued and the belt stretched on the pulleys. Now we'll get this inner clutch cover put back on here. Get those 4 big bolts through the gearbox. Now we can get the 3 bolts lined up for the engine. Now this thing being aluminum, it actually holds the crankshaft to gearbox distance. On the older ones with the plastic inner cover, you would have to set the distance with a tool and tighten the mounts down. Get this engine harness all plugged back in and secured. Get the exhaust manifold put back on. Securing the harness, runs up the top of the clutch cover. Grab a new oil filter and spin that on. Before we put some oil in this thing, 2.5 quarts. Now we're gonna get these clutches put back on. I think I'm double checking the timing here. Once I got the timing cover put back on, I could actually look at the timing marks in the correct spots. Wasn't really able to do that without the timing cover on. That right side engine cover. I left the clutch cover off to check belt alignment. So when I ran it that first time, I checked to see if the secondary clutch was spinning. If it is, you can look and see which sheave it's riding on in the primary. If it's the inner or the outer, you can move that secondary clutch in or out to fix that. I think I'm putting on the alternator cover, accessory belt drive cover. We'll get these tires put back on and torqued. Then we'll drive this thing outside and make sure the cooling system's bled. This vehicle will have heat, so we'll make sure that all the vents are hot before we roll it back inside and get this box put back on. Once we get this box put back on, we can go for a little test drive, make sure everything's okay, and give it back to the customer. That's all for this one. See you next time.